In chapter 10, we will be studying Judaism and Christianity, people of the Bible, and the years for this study will be 1700 BCE to 1100 CE. So we're going to be covering a fairly large time period. We'll start on this video with Judaism, and then we'll pick up with Christianity in the next video. So Judaism began around 4,000 years ago when God and Abraham sealed a covenant together. And the covenant or the promise was that Abraham and his descendants would forever worship and honor God, and in return, God would forever watch over and protect them. And we really see this as the pattern of the New Testament, is that when they stop revering God, God's hand of protection comes off of them. And so the name Judaism and their homeland, Judea, both come from Judah, who was a prophet and the fourth son of Jacob and Leah. So we've got Abraham and then his son Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob and Esau. So Jacob and his first wife Leah, their fourth son was Judah, and he later became the Davidic line, which was a predecessor to Christ himself. So one of the different factors about Christianity and Judaism is that they were monotheistic religions. They worshipped one God as opposed to many gods. And during this time, almost every other religion was a polytheistic religion. Okay, so what are the sacred scriptures in Judaism? They are collectively known as the Tanakh. I'm going to spell that for you so you don't have to try to figure that out on your own. And this consists of the Torah, which are the 5 books of Moses, the Nevi'im, which are the prophets, or the books of the prophets, and then the Ketuvim, which are the historical, poetic, and philosophical writings of the Bible. And so this is essentially what Christians consider the Old Testament. And both Jews and Christians have long regarded these books as the literal Word of God. The central beliefs of Judaism. First and foremost, they believe that there is one single caring God who demands obedience and who gives rewards and punishments fairly in accordance with his laws. And one of their founding verses is Deuteronomy 6:4 and 5, which says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and with all of your might." Another important belief is that he's a God of history, and his power changes the destinies of nations and kings and individuals. They also believe that they are a community that is a divinely chosen ethnic group. And they base that off of Genesis 12:1 and 2, which says, "Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great so that you will be a blessing." And there's an emphasis on a promised geographical homeland for these people. So there's, in the Old Testament, there's a lot of talk about the promised land, that God had a specific place in mind for these people. Another central belief is that God gave them a legal system to guide their behavior, the 10 Commandments, and then the Levitical law. And lastly, that God would give them a sacred calendar. And so God lays out for them in the Old Testament what events they are supposed to celebrate. And most of these celebrations are in Exodus or Numbers or Leviticus or Deuteronomy. Most of them are in the Torah. And this would be like Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Yom Kippur, Pentecost, Rosh Hashanah. And these are just some of the ones. And we'll talk in a second about more specifically about their main holidays. Okay, so the later scriptures are the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim. And the Nevi'im, again, are the prophet books. And the Ketuvim are like the historical and the poetic and the philosophical books. So like Job and Ruth, Proverbs, Psalms, Ecclesiastes, that kind of thing. And those books carry Jewish history from 1200 BCE to about 500 CE. And they begin with the book of Joshua and the return of the Jews from Egypt to Israel. And history suggests that the return was spread out over time, and that era involved extensive borrowing from other cultures. And one of the things that they borrowed from other cultures was rule by a judge or by a king. If you remember in the Old Testament, the people begged God to give them a king. They so desperately wanted a king. And so the Jews adopted like a loose confederacy advised by judges when they returned to Canaan or Israel. And so around 1020 BCE, they created kings to help them deal with internal strife. And eventually the kingdom split in two in reaction to Solomon's extravagant reign. Remember, so if you look specifically at the prophet books, you see a trend of morality and hope. And if you've read like Ezekiel or Jeremiah, they're almost always inspiring the people to return to their religious roots. If you don't return to your religious roots, then God will destroy us, or we'll be taken captive, or we'll be defeated by an army. And if you do return to your religious roots, then God will bless us. And it goes back to the covenant that God had made with Abraham, that if his people worshiped him and honored him, then he would bless them and protect them. And if they didn't, then he would remove his hand of blessing. Patriarchy and gender relations. This word patriarchy just refers to the fact that the eldest male dominated the home. This was a religion and a culture that valued the elderly and men. So that's patriarchy. The word father comes from this, and the word paternal. So women generally had fewer rights than men. There were times of the month when she was ritually unclean, and also during childbirth. But women, their main job was to bear children and to be a faithful, loving wife. There were some instances in the Tanakh, or however you say that, where a few women were credited with heroic roles. Deborah led Israel in peace and war times in the book of Judges in chapters 4 and 5. Ruth, who was a convert, taught the importance of openness to the outside world, and she actually became a predecessor to Christ himself. And then there was Esther, who married the Persian king and used her position to thwart Naaman's plans to kill all the Jews. So there were some instances in Jewish history where women did have a successful and a public role. So I want to insert a bullet point here that was sort of left out. Holidays, Jewish holidays, because that is important. And we'll just go over some of these. The first one is Rosh Hashanah, and I may be butchering the pronunciation of these, and if so, I'm so sorry. But this is just the new year, pretty much, the celebration of a new year, and it's for the purpose of keeping count of the years. The next one is Yom Kippur, and this is the Day of Atonement, and it's really just a day set aside for fasting and depriving oneself of pleasures and repenting from the sins of the previous years. And then you have Sukkot, and this one is a festival that commemorates the Israelites wandering around in the desert and then the final harvest. And this is also called the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Ingathering. Probably the most important one is Passover. And this is the holiday that commemorates the Exodus from Egypt. And it's the holiday that also marks the beginning of harvest season. If you remember in the book of Exodus, the 10th plague that God sends to Egypt is the death of the eldest son. And the Hebrews put the blood over their doors so that the Lord would pass over, or the angel of death would pass over their homes when they were taking the eldest from each family. And then you have Shabbat. And this is simply the Jewish Sabbath, and it's just a day of rest and spiritual enrichment. And they believe that since God rested on the seventh day after creating the world, that they should rest as well, not to mention God had commanded them to rest. All right, defeat, exile, and redefinition. And I'm going to try to minimize this so I can write some more. Hopefully I'll keep this straight. And you'll see this word used a lot, diaspora. And this just refers to, in general, a dispersion of people. And the Jews were dispersed many times throughout history. The first time it happened when Sennacherib of Assyria dispersed the Jews of the northern kingdom of Israel, and this happened in 721 BCE. So they were first taken by the Assyrians, and they were returned 60 years later. And sometimes they're referred to as the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And then in 586 BCE, Babylonian conquerors destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and again exiled thousands of Jews, this time from the southern king of Judah, to Babylon. And if you've read the book of Daniel, chapter 1, this is mentioned. And Daniel and his friends were some of the ones taken from the southern tribes of Israel. And so there have been many different outsider groups who have conquered the Jews or displaced them or forced them to assimilate or tried to force them to assimilate. The Roman Empire destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE and dispersed the people in 135 CE. And so the diaspora really reshaped Jewish beliefs. And really, there have been no significant numbers of Jews in Judea until the 20th century, until 1948, when they officially became a nation again. So what were the effects of the diaspora? Like I said, it reshaped some of their beliefs, but by and large, the Jews have remained a distinct people even when they were placed in new settlements. And there were some people, especially in Babylon, who came to love Babylon, and even after they were permitted to go back home, they chose to stay. But there have also been remnants of Jewish groups who have remained distinctly Jewish in other settlements. In some cases, they've flourished and become wealthy, and in other instances, they've faced discrimination. But one example of Jewish survival in the face of diaspora existed when Rabbi Benjamin from Spain visited Muslim Baghdad in 1160, and he reported, and this is a direct quote, "In Baghdad there are about 40,000 Jews, and they dwell in security, prosperity, and honor under the great caliph. And among them are great sages, the heads of academies, engaged in the study of law. In this city there are 10 academies and 28 Jewish synagogues." And of course we know there are also examples where people have tried to wipe them off of the face of the earth. Like in the book of Esther, when Naaman came up with a plot to destroy the Jews in Persia. So we'll stop there and we'll pick up with Christianity in the next video.